Oh, oh, you are.
Yeah,
So
I should.
everybody, welcome. Hi, this is Jaime Laredo, and we are honored today to have again Emmanuel X, who's been joining us. This is third day in a row, and thank you so much for being here, Manny.
My pleasure.
And our really special guest, the incredible composer Gabriela Lena Frank. And Gabriela, welcome. It's so nice of you to do this, and it's wonderful to see you again. I haven't seen you in years.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. It's really wonderful to be here with all of you.
Well, it's really great, and we want to hear all about you, all about your life and everything. First of all, your background is so incredible. It's just, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. Well, I should lead off by saying that I think my background is a very American story, very American background. My father grew up in the Bronx in New York, and we like to say he was a nice Jewish boy from the Bronx and descended from Eastern European Jews that fled in a couple of different waves, mostly coming from Russia, Ukraine, Lithuania. And we cannot trace back the family name very far because they were largely servants and would keep changing their name as they joined each new master's household. But we do know that there were musicians in the family. They didn't go professional, but they were talented. We suspect several generations had perfect pitch and they could improvise. They fiddled and they played keyboards. And my father was born right as World War II was ending. And so like a lot of New York Jews was from a very liberal standpoint that looked at the world as one in which young people needed to go and be involved in, to be artist citizens, to be writers, to be doctors. And he was supposed to join my grandfather in running the pharmacy. They had a pharmacy in the Bronx. And my grandfather, Jacob Frank, had gone to Columbia Pharmacy School in the 20s and 30s. But my dad had a creative side to him. He loved American literature. And so he went to Michigan instead and studied literature there. And then he heard about this program that a then young and untested John F. Kennedy, President Kennedy, had started called the Peace Corps. So Dad signed up and was among the first wave of the Peace Corps in the early 60s. And just like the way it's run today, young volunteers go to other countries and they help out with education or sanitation, other matters that are of particular importance to that country. Often they're economically depressed and you don't get a say where you get stationed. So Dad was assigned to a small, beautiful Andean nation of Peru. And that's where he met my mom. And my mother herself grew up in Chimbote, which is a small fishing village, famoso por su anchoveta, famous for its anchovies and its guano, which is bird poop, which makes great fertilizer with a really lucrative commodity in the 60s, and brought waves of wealth to Peru. And my mother herself is descended from of Chinese of people that the Chinese came not just in the railroads or in the gold rush along the Pacific coast as these events were happening. They came in multiple waves. And so my great grandfather came from the Cantonese region of China. We know his name, Po Seong Kam. And we know that he was a man of some means. He immediately landed in Peru in the 1880s and 90s, around that time, and opened up stores for the miners. I married a local native Indian woman. So my mom's family, you heard Chinese, Cantonese, you heard Quechua, which was the Indian language as descended from the Incas, and Spanish. And my mother grew up cooking Chinese food because this is what made her father very happy. So her father was born in Peru, half Chinese, half Indian, but was sent back to China to grow up. So for all intents and purposes, with a muy chino. He was a very deeply Chinese man and came back to Peru 1819 to work in the mines. So my mom had 12 brothers and sisters, and one of her older sisters was a secretary for the Peace Corps volunteer office. And there was a party, and there was a meeting of my parents that, of course, was very fortuitous for my brother and me that this happened. And my parents were so young. So this would have been about 1965. And they knew each other maybe 3 or 4 months. My mother was 17 and my dad was 21. And they just said, yeah, we can do this. And dad entered grad school in Berkeley, California. After that, bringing home a young Peruvian bride. My brother was born a couple years later, and I came a few years after that. So I grew up in Berkeley in the early 70s. And my first piano teacher, who was my mother number 2, she was a refugee from South Africa, a soft-spoken Afrikaner woman, and she would give me pieces of music alongside Bach and Clementi that were from countries that don't even exist anymore, like Ruthenia or Transylvania, Yugoslavia, along with African tunes. And I thought this was just music. There wasn't any borders or boundaries. And most of my girlhood friends were people like me, with one parent that was native to the United States, but with one immigrant parent. There was Marquesa, who was half African-American, half Japanese. Emiliana was half French and Vietnamese. Nyasha, her father was one of the bishops of Zimbabwe. Her mother was a German woman. This was just normal. I was the one that was Peruvian, Chinese, Jewish. This was just, to me, that was very American. And so I grew up studying piano and didn't know it's possible to become a composer, and didn't understand this ability to improvise in a perfect pitch that I had was something that was a genetic trait on my father's side of the family. And during the 70s and 80s, there was so much turmoil in South America that a lot of refugees were coming up from places like Chile after the fallout between Allende and Pinochet, the leaders there, and La Guerra Sucia, the dirty war in Argentina, Sendero Luminoso, the Shining Path terrorist group in Peru. So these were really difficult times. But it meant for me that even though my mother didn't go back to Peru for many, many decades after she married my father, that I saw refugees coming up from Peru, from Bolivia, from Ecuador, the surrounding countries. And then they would bring their culture. They would bring music. They would bring restaurants. They looked like my mother. They didn't look Mexicano, which is the dominant Latin American culture. So I heard this music. So I heard the music of panpipes, and I heard Andean music. I saw the little small charango guitars, and these concerts were some of the only concerts that I could sit through without fidgeting. And I was just mesmerized, and there was something that was being passed along to me so deep. And I would see the joy on my mother's faces, and I would see Chinese Peruvian musicians. And this left a really great impression. And the summer before my senior year in high school, I was scholastically a high achiever. My father's a prominent Mark Twain scholar, as in studying Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. My mom became a stained glass artist. My brother's the first Latino to graduate from Stanford with a doctorate in neuroscience. I mean, we were kind of an overachieving family in many ways. And I was studying Russian. I was probably on my way to law school. And I was thinking that I would study political science. This was the time of Glasnost and Perestroika and Gorbachev. The wall had come down in Europe. And I mean, these are remarkable events for a young person, own political awakening in the late 80s. And then, because I wanted to beef up my extracurriculars for my college applications for undergrad, I decided, okay, I've been studying piano. I'm going to go do some like real piano program. And this is not to slight my teacher, who's still alive and still teaches children. She's in her mid 80s. She's still a wonderful teacher. But the education I received with her wasn't about contemporary music. It was very deep, in that every Sunday I would go to her house. She and her husband had a deep and abiding love of piano music. And this was how I was introduced to the music making of Manny Axe, was LPs that my teacher had that we would listen to, along with others like Gilels and Alicia de la Rocha and Arau. And I learned all of this piano repertoire by listening. And she cultivated a deep patience. And she loved art songs. So I also started learning all the Schubert songs. Um, and so between these two mediums, I did have an exposure to classical music, but beyond that, I didn't. So this summer before my senior year, I discovered there was something called the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, which is one of our great music schools, especially on the West Coast. They had a composition program. And I said, okay, I'll do this. It's 6 weeks long, and I can put this down in my college applications. And little did I know that my life was going to change. And I took the BART subway over and to the old Spanish building on Ortega Street, and walked in. And that first moment when I walked in, the first sensation I had was suddenly a cacophony of music coming from every corner of the building, because I didn't know what a practice room was. And there were practice rooms down the hallways in every direction. It was a crazy labyrinth of a building with pianos, different, like 30 pianos in one building. And you have to understand, when I was growing up, we just had spinets and an old upright, and I loved the yearly recital in the church. They would always have a second piano in the back, and I loved the difference between the pianos. And they each had their own character, and the pedals would work differently. And to me, it was magical. Suddenly, there were 30 of these beautiful beasts that were in this, this one building. And I also remember going into the first classroom for music I'd ever seen. I saw staff lines that were painted on the chalkboard. I was like, oh my God, this is a thing. This is amazing. And the first textbook, theory textbook, I opened up. And instead of horrible chemistry or algebra, it was music. And it was just an explanation of these chords that I had discovered on my own. And that was it. I was hooked. And I didn't know how I was going to make money. And I came home, and I do remember my heart started beating. And I started growing up in that moment. And I didn't know any professional musicians, but I just knew I had to do this. So I went home and I told my parents, and I said, I'm going to be a composer. I'm already a composer. You guys challenged me to improvise something in the key of F major, and I'll just sit down and come up with something. And I didn't know it was a thing. Why didn't you ever tell me this was a thing to do? And I said, okay, it's a thing. It's a thing. It's a thing. Go and major in it. But if you're going to do this, you need to go deep. And I did. I was all in, and I wound up my first school with Rice University, the Shepherd School of Music. And I worked with a lot of great string players like Sergio Luca, Kenneth Goldsmith, both of whom are no longer with us, and Norman Fisher, Karen Vischer. I mean, just so many wonderful, wonderful people. And after that, I went up to the University of Michigan, and I got my doctorate there. So I got 3 degrees, and I stayed another 11 years after high school. But it didn't feel like a chore. I really loved being in the conservatory very much. Halfway through, I discovered the music of Bartók, who I consider my grandfather, and who I think was a Latino in a previous life, because these rules that he had come up for himself are universal and timeless, about understanding culture and brotherhood and traveling and being a storyteller and bettering your craft. And the bar was set so high for me to achieve a similar level of study and execution of these stories that have to be told. So Bartók, of course, looked at the music of a native Europe, I like to say, and was not bound by political boundaries. And I used that as my model as I began to finally travel in Latin America. Around this time, my mother also returned. So all of my trips to Peru, particularly in this rich, I'm going to say 15, 17 year period between about 1998, when I was in my mid-20s, until about 5 years ago, my mother and I always did these trips together. So they were deeply personal, with no real game plan other than going to a place that my mother could not see when she was a young girl. They didn't have a lot of money. and to try and piece together our Chinese history, our Indian history. And then my job as a composer is to try to retell these stories, but not in a literal way. I mean, that's not magical, is to distill these stories to my life, today's time, and to redefine what it means to have a cultural heritage. So I feel that these are stories we're still needing to tell. This past year has been a really tumultuous one as we're looking at who's a good American. We're asking this question, who belongs? Who does this country serve? And I think we artists are a very important part of that discussion if we look at our colleagues and how rich they are and our own stories. So that's my background.
Wow, what a life you've already had. Jeez. Well, your piece that the kids have been studying and so on during this period, these few days, Elegia Andina, that's what brought me to you. That's how we got together. Because I will always remember I was supposed to be conducting a program with the Detroit Symphony. And at that time you were composer in residence. And so they asked me if I could do a work of yours. And I have to confess, at that time, this was many years ago, and I had heard your name, but I was not aware, I wasn't acquainted with your music. And so they sent me, a couple of CDs of your music, and I was just bowled over. I was absolutely bowled over. And then when I saw the score of the Andina, when I did it, that was it. That was it. And we've done it so many times. And of course, we did it at NISOS several years ago at Carnegie. So,
Yeah,
and Manny,
and
you're new to this piece, right?
Yeah, well, I'm new to any music of Ms. Frank's. Actually, this is a new experience for me. So my first question, I have a question. Has anyone here read the novel Dr. No, the first James Bond novel, Ian Fleming?
Sure.
Okay, the reason I ask about it is because Gabriela mentioned guano, and that's how Dr. No dies at the end of the book, by being immersed in guano. So I just thought you might want to know that. Bird poop. It's not connected to music. I thought it might be an interesting fact for everybody.
Well, he was a very terrible villain to deserve such a grim fate.
Yeah, it's just a connection. So first of all, we were just talking about the very evocative sort of runs that you have in the flute, and in fact in both flutes, where for a while they play alternating patterns, and then sometimes they play at the interval of a second, and the clarinet has some very evocative, not as fast, but very ending up on the same note, ending up on B's a lot, right? And so one of the things that I wanted to ask was, why those pitches? I mean, why E minor, first of all, or why does it start in E minor? Is there, how do composers pick a key?
That's a great question. And, I have perfect pitch. So I don't have synesthesia, but I do have a sense of color or sentiment with different keys. And E minor is one that is such a lyrical key to me. There's something so immediate about it. It's also a key that is common when you look at South American music, the folkloric music. It's a key that lays well into the tuning of different types of instruments. They can be strung instruments and or lyrical instruments.
Is that because of the guitar, or?
Yes, absolutely. The guitar had a big influence. E minor, just the spacings of it is related to G major, which is another key that works really well with different instruments. The guitar came over from Spain. And if you look at old traditional Indian music, they were already writing in keys that were similar to E minor. So when I hear E minor, I'm already on a different continent. I'm already in South America. So
But you So you are working tonally. I mean, this piece in a way is tonal. I mean, obviously because it goes back to E minor. I mean, you wind
Yeah,
up you add the flute stuff on top of what starts, right?
so I would say it's loosely tonal. It may not always have a nice 1-4-5-1
Yeah,
kind of
no,
ending,
I understand, right, right.
but it's not atonal. I would not say it's atonal. And then those black notes you were talking about, they may not belong in the key of E minor.
Mhm.
Often the dissonant notes, whether they're seconds, you're talking about the seconds or the black notes, they're
Mhm.
often supportive of the E minor. They might be grace notes, quick little notes. They might
Yeah.
be inflected notes. Yeah, yeah, but
And
they minor.
yeah, the other general question I had was, of course, the middle section with all the sort of the Stravinsky-like violins, but all the rhythms in that section, are those patterns particular to anything that you, I mean, are those they're very exciting and original. I just wondered if if the patterns were something that you base on something, or it's just what you want. I mean,
I yeah, I think it's in the air. It's somewhere in between. It's in the air. When I think of Peruvian music, I I go to certain kinds of rhythms and certain kinds of energies. I may not say, okay, this is from Chimbote, the fishing village, or this is the typical rhythm of a
Mhm.
certain area of Arequipa or different areas. But there is definitely a flavor, a type of vocabulary that I'll start moving into, and it may not be packaged neatly. Now, also, Elegia Andina is my first orchestra work. It's a student work. It was written 20 years ago, and I was beginning to find my way and beginning to
Mhm.
trust that Peruvian sounds and harmonies, the black notes, the white notes, they were in my blood and I could just trust it. It's kind of like, are you starting to over practice now at the piano? That you have to trust at a certain point that you've done your homework and it's going to come out as it needs to on the stage.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that was the first piece that was a turning point to me, that I had done my study. It was something that was becoming really native to me and to trust it. So it also means trusting when you deviate from the norm. It's something may not be strictly perfectly a pattern, but there is a strong derivation or distillation of it.
and then
You
how do you,
know,
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jimmy.
no, I was just going to say, I love the fact that you call this a student work. Oh my God. I don't think of it as a student work at all. It's so
Well, you
beautifully
look at,
written. It's so beautifully crafted. It's just it's an amazing piece, I think.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
and
I don't
and
mean
and you
that.
know, wherever I've done it, and I've done it many, many, many times with different orchestras, and wherever I do it, the musicians love playing it. They love playing it.
Oh,
And I've had so many percussion players come up to me after the first rehearsal, thanking me for programming this piece and saying, "Oh my God, we're having such a great time. We just love doing this."
And
wow.
so I was also going to ask about instrumentation. How do you decide what material goes where? And so just something like the beginning, how do you decide who plays what? I just, I'm just,
Mhm.
I don't know anything about creating a piece of music. So I know these are all probably very silly questions, but how does
No.
one decide on a texture, a
Well,
particular texture?
yeah, you can start with what is the goal. So if you say, if you look at that line that starts off very high in the flutes and it's something that can soar over the orchestra.
Mhm.
If I were to put a clarinet up there in the same register, the clarinets can do it, but the energy is so different. Rather than sounding like they're off in the clouds, they sound like they're pushing the voice up. There's a tension to the line. It's already highly striking in a way, and you may want to reserve that color. You may want to earn it. Maybe we don't start off with that kind of color just yet. It has to seem like it's effortless. So sometimes the intentions are what tell you which instruments are capable of carrying the intentions. And in that line, when the flutes do it, and you mentioned the clarinets doing it next, it's as if that line is passing the baton down. So the flutes pass that line to the
Of course, they
clarinets.
do it, it's an octave lower.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then the clarinets pass it to the bassoons.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a registral change, but there's also a color. It's getting darker and darker and darker. By the time when the bassoons pass it at long last to the low cellos and the basses, what an inheritance. The line has been traveling to you, it finally rests to you, and it's up to the basses to bring it up, the cellos to bring it up to that exciting violin. So you want to feel like there's a journey, there's a temporal journey to it. Even physically within the orchestra, what's so nice about being a conductor or a concerto soloist, you can feel the 3D-ness of the sound traveling around you. There's a sort of internal theater that happens. And so to finally see, to feel that, the audience gets a sense of that. And to me, that's like entering a new landscape. You're getting a sense of entering South America when there's a sense of something taking a journey around the orchestra. So that will influence me too. Now, in order for the clarinet to be audible around the clarinet, I have to change what everybody's doing around the clarinet. So the tutti, we say, they need to be a little quieter maybe, or there needs to be more space. You don't orchestrate so densely, you don't make such thick chords, because the clarinet has a more mellow sound. When we get to the bassoon player, by now there's a pattern. Every time a new instrument comes up, the percussion that Jaime was talking about, they come in, it's almost like they're ending one phrase and going to the next one. So now the audience is along for the ride. They psychologically know where it's going. So it's a great question, and these choices need to be not promiscuous or accidental. They need to really create their own internal magical logic. Yeah.
Are there times when you've done a piece, you're hearing the first rehearsal, and you want to make changes in terms of register, instrumentation, all of those?
All the time.
Okay. No, I'm curious because I've seen a couple of other composers, who deal with that stuff, and I just wondered, what.
Yeah, the reason is because
do you rewrite? I guess I should add, do you rewrite on the spot, or is this something that takes a long time? Do you let the first performance happen and then you do 6 months later, it's a different kind of thing, or is it something you try to change first rehearsal to second?
So having performed myself in new works and knowing what goes into learning a new work, I don't like to make really deep changes. Instead, at the first rehearsal, first of all, I don't go to the first rehearsal. I think the players need to be able to work on the music without the composer breathing down their neck.
So you probably wouldn't change much from the first rehearsal.
No,
no,
not very much. But where I will make changes is if I can grab some of my friends, and I do workshopping before I turn the piece in. Before I even get it to the commissioner, I will call up my good friend Lucy Lynn and say, Lucy, you're a Boston Symphony violinist. How much rehearsal time will this take? And then, is there an easier way for me to climb the fingerboard?
Yeah.
Is there a better way that I can make this work? To me, that's the time to do all the rewriting and revisions, and to use the information from one violinist to define what you're going to do for an entire violin section. You have to use just a little seed of information like that, because I don't have an orchestra just in my backyard.
Yeah.
And
you don't?
You have to treat the rehearsal situation as something in which we're 95% getting to work, and 5%, whatever changes happen, is to make it easier for the performers to get to work. Now, after the premiere is another story. There have been composers that do extensive revision. We can't even recognize the work anymore. and others do more minor fixes. And I tend to fall into more minor fixes because, again, I did most of that workshopping and asking questions from my performer friends months before, if not a whole year before the premiere. And then when I do revisions after, I like to wait. If I can, I'll wait a whole year. I'll wait many months because sometimes I'm listening to, for instance, how long is a melody, right? And maybe it's in 3/4 followed by 2/4, and I'm going, okay, da 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 da. I'm ready for the end about here. Oh, darn it, I missed it. It should be 2 beats, not 3 beats. And then I'll have a fresh sense of the proportions of the line, and I might shave off a beat or add a little more. I could say, man, I'm making that performer. They only have 3 bars to do a really difficult slowdown, a really difficult retard. So it's like an airplane that needs more space to more runway to get off. So I'll say, okay, they need another bar. Sometimes have a better sense of proportions like that when I have distance. And those are, yeah.
I seem to be I don't mean to monopolize the questions, but I'm just, I hope it's okay, Jamie, but.
Are you kidding? I think
it's
wonderful because you're asking questions that we all want to know. Well, what I did want to say, Gabriela, is the kids have been working on this on Elegia Andina, and I would love to ask our two flute players who I think are standing by to play that wonderful. There's an incredible part in this piece of it's a flute cadenza for two players, and if they could play part of that for you, and maybe you can give them a few ideas.
I love it.
Are you guys available now?
Hello.
Yeah, there you are.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Aaron. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Aaron.
All right, I'm going to play the first part of the cadenza. Starting
Okay.
from M.
Bravo, Aaron.
Awesome.
That is just beautiful. You know, what I really appreciate, Aaron, what you're doing is sometimes I get flutists that are shy about those accents at the end. The and you're not shy about that at all. And I think those little touches are the things that put you in Peru immediately. A Peruvian that knows folkloric music would say, "Ah, que peruano." You know, there's something that's really characterful about it. Those are typical wind effects because this culture of people, they live up in the mountains. There's not a lot of oxygen in the air. So everything's about breath. Everything's about the richness of the air, and it affects how they make music. So when they are playing a wind instrument, they will blow all the air out of the lungs in order to take a really big breath for the next phrase. Everything's really exaggerated. And what ends up happening when you do that, there's this accent at the end of everything. And it's crept into the vocal music. It's crept into things that, you know, don't even depend on wind like that. And so I'm always trying to, sometimes when I work with classically trained musicians, say, no, you trust me, you sound good. You sound authentic. You're not a bad player for putting all that weight at the end of the line. I love how you're doing that. You know, so thank you for that. It's beautiful.
Yeah, bravo. Let's hear the other part now, okay?
Oh, sure. I think maybe
I think where is she?
Nadira was
Indira.
going to play actually a different part of the piece from letter A, I believe. I think she has
Oh,
that.
okay, fine.
Yeah, maybe she's down to play the second
There
part.
she is, Nadira. Hi.
Hi. Yeah, I was told to prepare the solo in the beginning.
Fine, great, whatever.
Okay.
Nice, awesome.
Bravo.
Wow,
Bravo.
you're another beautiful player, Nadira. Thank you for that so much. And I mean, even through Zoom, I can tell you have such a beautiful quality, and that there'll be no trouble hearing you, but you don't sound hard at all. You sound like you're, you know, something off in the skies. You're just sailing over the orchestra, and it should be something after this mysterious opening where the orchestra slowly coming to life. And then you're this luminous spirit that's just coming out. So it's gorgeous. I love it.
Bravo.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Manny,
These
I
are
think you
great
have to turn
players,
on your light.
Jamie.
I have more questions. So here's
Manny,
a,
you have to turn on a light. You're in the dark now.
oh, sorry, put it on right
there you
now.
go.
Sorry, here it is. Yeah. So this is probably a stupid question, and you get asked this a lot, but I still don't. How do you decide on the length of a piece? Or
Well,
let me put it another way. How do you decide when a piece is over?
I think that's the more interesting question, because the answer to the first question is I often don't get to decide when an orchestra comes to me and say, we want a piece of 20 to 25 minutes.
Yes, I asked it
Yeah.
wrong. I meant, how do you decide? This is, right, okay.
Well, you know, when I compose, it's not a linear process. I don't usually start with the beginning and just go straight through. And I start, sometimes the ending is what comes to me next. And then I know that I finished the piece because what I've written has earned the ending. It's just there. It's just complete. It's almost like, how do you know when to stop cooking another dish for a meal that you're going to cook for your friends? Do we really need a 9-plate appetizer menu before we get to the main course? There's a sense of balance that you have there. There have been times where the piece just needed 1 or 2 minutes more and I was strictly over, or it was done. I was strictly 1 or 2 minutes under the commission that was asked. And I'll go check. I'll check with the commissioner and say, look, I think that's really proportioned out right. I did my best to get it to 20 minutes, but it's actually 19 or 21 minutes. Are we okay with this? Then I'll need to explain why. And I'll say, look, because I want to add that cadenza for 2 flutes. I could have written Elegia Andina without the cadenza and shortened it by what, Jamie, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, something like that.
At
Yeah.
least, maybe
Yeah.
3, yeah.
Yeah, maybe even 3. So it probably could work. What if we had a wind down and it wasn't that introspective moment? But I would say, I think we really need a cadenza, and it's going to add 2 or 3 minutes. So you have to weigh everything. You have to, have you honored the journey that you wanted the audience to feel? There's a multiple factors go in.
Are there composers that you see as role models in terms of time management?
Bill Bolcom. And
Okay.
Bill Bolcom, I think, is a master at that, at proportion. Often people will look at the wit of the music, how well written it is idiomatically for the players, how much fun it's to do, and just the skill, and he's just a giant intellect, this man. He was my main teacher, so he had a very powerful influence on me. But what I think is overlooked is how perfectly proportioned. The pieces are never too long and they're never too short. They're always the right number of movements. They carry, they cover all the ground that needs to be covered in that piece. He is absolutely skilled. I would also look at Bartok. I think Bartok is just a master, that when the pieces are done, you're left wanting more, but just because you're entranced by the music, not because it feels incomplete. So I think those two are quite wonderful. Another one would be Chen Yi. I think she's a wonderful, wonderful composer.
I have a, she did a 4-minute piece for me, so it's not so big.
I think she and her husband Zhou Long are just masters at what they do and the stories they tell. They know when to begin a piece, when to end a piece, when to go to a new section, new movement.
Who do you think is good at endings?
Oh, Bartok again.
You think he's good?
I think he's good. But I think he's hard to do. I think it's endings.
You think he writes good endings?
I do. I think it's hard to do. Sometimes they're so abrupt, but if you can, that's just who he was. He was a difficult personality. I think he's very good at endings. Again, I think Chen Yi and Bolcom are good at ending. I think another composer good at endings was Hinastera. He knew how to do these kind of drum beats, and he knew how to end movements quietly. The cello piano sonata, the adagio movement. It's such a weird movement. You're like, what? I'm like in Dr. Seuss land.
I'm ashamed to say I don't know that piece. I'm ashamed to say.
Sorry. I have a question. It's probably a silly question, but why is it that today almost every composer always likes to end a piece softly?
Good question.
Wow. Let's see. Maybe I'm not with it. I hadn't noticed that. I actually think soft endings are hard to do well. The good, like big crowd rising ending is easier to do. I think soft endings, especially after a big piece.
But really, that's interesting
Jamie,
to say that, because so many pieces today are always end quietly and
Jamie,
just fade away.
Jamie, you're absolutely right. I mean, I totally agree with you that most, yes, I think most people do that. I agree. Yeah.
And yet you say that that's harder. That's very interesting to me.
I think it's hard to do well, and especially if say the grand finale piece is this rousing, energetic, big piece, big movement. To bring all of that down, it's like bringing a bowl down to heel quickly and quietly. You know, there's a lot of energy you're trying to contain to bring down small and delicate. I think
so. Why does it happen?
I don't know. Maybe people need peace, or in these tumultuous times. I don't know. That's a good question.
Okay. No, it's just if you think of most 18th or 19th century music, you'd be very hard put to name more than 10 pieces that ends softly outside of opera.
That's true.
That's one of the things that makes the Tchaikovsky Sixth Symphony so incredibly unusual.
Unusual,
And that it ends so softly. And until then, how many pieces were written like that?
But of course, that's like an opera, that piece.
Right, yeah.
That's like ending the Verdi Requiem or Aida or something.
Yeah.
So
I just want to, we have to wrap up fairly soon. And I just want to, if any of the kids, any participants, if you have any questions, please don't be shy and ask Gabriela whatever. It doesn't necessarily have to be about her piece, but just anything, just pop up, okay?
Yeah, I would love to hear from any of you.
I
I have a question.
Yeah, and we have a
Sorry to
Hank
bother you.
also.
I was wondering, when working with live composers, this is more of a question about practicality and etiquette. What do you think is a good way generally to approach communicating them, about whether it be a question of a piece or in terms of, just how you want to present their work? What do you prefer when you're hearing from performers that are eager to perform one of your works?
And it's just somebody that I know, or somebody like a composer you don't know, sort of like out of the blue, or because it's different.
Out of the blue.
Out of the blue. Well, first I would do a little cyber stalking to see if they're on Facebook, or you could do see if they've done interviews and try to get a sense of their character. And you'll see that some, especially some very well-known composers, might be a little reclusive. And so you just try to do your homework first and listen to recordings or talk to performers that have championed that piece, and maybe get your information that way. Then if you don't mind getting turned down, go ahead and write an email, find their website, send it through. I can't tell you how many really well-known composers love being championed by somebody from the next generation or the next generation after that, that they're very moved by the fact that what they came up with decades ago is still living in your imagination and in your heart. So you might as well just try. Then when you do reach out, I wouldn't put all your questions in that first email, even if your recitals next week. Like, plan ahead a little bit and leave that time, and then say, if they seem receptive to it, then I would say, well, I'm going to write out some of my questions, but I also can put it up as a video. Maybe I can demonstrate a couple different ways that I have to do it. If you can get right to playing and don't just say, tell me what to do. The composers don't know what to do with that. They tell me what to do. But if you give them interpretation and you say, I have 5 different ways of doing this line. This first one, I thought this. The second one, I thought this. The third. For me, that works really well. I used to be really active as a pianist, and I really respect performers that have a few different ways they could do things, even if it's imperfect. I can see past the fact that it's still a little green in your fingers, but that you're trying these different ways. And then when I give feedback, I often won't pick. I'll just say, well, with way number 1, I'm hearing this. Way number 2, it sounds like this to me. Way number 3 might be the more aggressive side. Way number 4 might be if you're like, being more laid back because you're saving it, whatever it is, And then what's really interesting for me, if it's a piece that had a Latin American cast to it, there's some inspiration from Latin America. I love it when performers, instead of listening to another recording of that string quartet done by the premiering string quartet, they actually go and listen to the native Peruvian instruments. If the name of the movement is Pan Pipe from Arequipa, they go on YouTube and they listen to Pan Pipes from Arequipa instead of the string quartet that's supposed to sound like a pan pipe from Arequipa. You see, they go to the source and they come up with their own ideas about it. I love that. And so you can have a really imaginative way, to engage with the composer. If it's somebody that you can actually say, I have a better way of doing this for you. You can go even deeper. And you can say, you might want to consider this fingering instead, or I offer to edit this line for you. I'm going to put my fingering in. As long as you credit me, and it should say edited by Aaron Sarkisian, right? In the score with your fingerings and whatnot. But So there's not just one approach, I guess is what I'm trying to tell you. There's a variety of approaches, just like with anything, you know, you have gradations of yourself that you offer as a storyteller and interpreter of the music. It's a great question.
I think we have another question from one of our clarinetists. Hank, do you?
Hank, yeah.
Hi,
There you are.
yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for coming on here. It's so incredible to hear your experiences and your processes whenever you create different works and whatnot. I wanted to ask, so I actually do a lot of arrangements for different chamber ensembles and everything. And most of the time, obviously, that doesn't involve any sort of original content. But I guess this is just sort of a basic, composition question when sometimes I get asked to arrange like a folk song or something that's traditional, and I have to sort of come up with some original content, and I have such a hard time doing that. So how do you come up with, compositions and musical content that you put inside of them? Like, does it come out of thin air? Is there a specific process that you have? How do you go about doing that?
Well, so do you consider yourself primarily a performer first and a composer arranger second?
Yes.
That's kind of, yeah, okay. So, and if you're in this ensemble, I'm going to assume that you're a very accomplished and a beautiful artist already on a clarinet. Let's just call that a given. I can't tell you how many times now in the last 10, 15 years, old schoolmates of mine that I'm still in touch with, we're all growing old together. It's really beautiful that, and new players want me to look at a piece of music that they're writing and they're nervous. More nervous than if they were a freshman composition major. And on the upside, you know what a good piece of music sounds like. Your experience with performing new music, you have a lot of insights that are truly hard-earned and deserved and valuable. One of the challenges of that knowledge is that you scare yourself into expecting the music to look that way as it comes out of your pencil and pen. And if you can just remind yourself that Beethoven's first sketches were super, super trite, super, super bad. They were really bad, it gives me courage. And you have to remember that it looks really humble. If you were to look at the stuff that I have to forgive myself for, I'm still embarrassing myself and for myself that I don't just write a symphony immediately now, that I still start with ta, 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 ta. But look, that turned into a major symphony, right? 2 little notes like that. So that's going to be the first thing. It's a psychological mindset, which is to be patient and to grow it. And then you start small. You start with a little idea, and kind of like I was saying about a flutist, I can give 5 different interpretations of something. See if you can grow that line. You give yourself 20 minutes, 5 different ways. Don't think about it too much. You just got to come up with 5 ways. And you don't have to flash out every single darn note. It can just be something B majory, maybe an arpeggio. I'm going to go in my Sholomon register. I'll figure it out, but I want to wind up here. You could just kind of write words, and you could say, that's how I could climb this line up. Or I could just leap. And then when I leap, I'm going to leap too far and then fall down. Okay, that's way number 2. Way number 3 could be, I'm going to pass it to the flutist. And the flutist will climb, and I'll just be there to catch the ball when it lands on the other side. That's way number 3. If you can just play a game with yourself a little bit, make sure that you're not stressing out, bring back joy, no shaming. There's a lot of shaming in our business. And you got to bring back joy into it and discovery into this process. Then, so that took you 20 minutes. You get your 5 different ways. Say you have another 40 minutes before you have to go practice or whatever. You're going to say, okay, now I'm going to spend 20 minutes on 2 of these ideas to flesh out. And if you spend a few hours in the whole thing, like over a week, and you've got this beautiful, like 30-second line that's starting to come to life in 5 different ways, now you have the hard job of picking among your children, which is the one that's going to go into your piece. So you have to start eliminating. But that's a good problem to have. You're eliminating from an abundance rather than going from an empty manuscript paper, which is where you were before, right? So I'm a big proponent of trying to bring back the sense of play, the ability to discard, the ability to not have it perfect when it first comes out. You see what I'm doing here? It's allowing your brain to do what it naturally does, which is to react and imagine and create. This brain that we have was built to be creative. It wasn't built to be a factory and just come out with this cookie cutter assembly line of ideas before we even do anything. You have to get in there and you have to do it. And I would try that and see what that does for you after maybe it'll probably take you about 1 to 2 months before this becomes natural and native feeling, this way of working. But it's like a fingering on the clarinet that doesn't feel good at first. And your teacher said, no, promise me. I mean, just stay with this. It's going to be better than the one you're working now. And then in about a week, God darn it, it is. You know? So if you try this for a little while, I promise this will innovate your habit. It
Absolutely.
will.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, great question.
Gabriela, thank you so much for this wonderful hour. And Manny, thank you. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Both of you. It was just
Nice
so great.
to see you.
So great to have you.
Nice to see
Yeah.
everybody. Thanks, guys. Thanks to all the kids for listening. It's very
Yes.
nice.
Yes.
Okay.
And there are a lot listening.
Yeah.
So,
See you next time.
okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.